Thank you. I'm Tom Stafford. I'm a lecturer in psychology and cognitive science. And I'm interested in learning. That's what I research. That's what I want to talk about. And I want to talk about you, because you are amazing, as I'm sure you will feel deeply inside. You walk, you talk, you drink, full bowel control, I assume. Amazing. But if you think about it, you started off none of those things. You were born without the walking, talking, or the bowel control. And you learn that stuff. How did you do that? Incredible. That's what I want to know. I want to talk about how I got into researching the science of learning. And it's a happy story. I was involved in a European robotics project, an EU project with a terrible acronym. And they said, if we're going to teach robots useful skills, we need to build into the robot's brain algorithms for learning from their experience. We can't just teach them, they've got to learn. So we've got to understand learning so we can build robots that are versatile, that they can acquire new skills based on their experience. This was about 10 years ago I started on this. It was a tremendous thing to kind of get at the beginning of my career, and it's kind of launched me on the trajectory of trying to understand learning from this particular perspective, not just what it looks like, but what are the mechanisms that are in our brain that allow us to learn new things? And obviously, the vital question, how do you learn better? So there's one graph in this talk, but I'm going to show many variations. It's always the same graph, and it's a thing we all know intimately from our own lives, the learning curve. The learning curve has the amount you practice along the bottom, the x-axis, and how good you are on the y-axis vertically. And it shows what we all understand from learning things in our own lives. You start off, you get better rapidly, and then it slows down. Okay? And this is a very high-level view of learning. We see this whether people are learning languages or they're dribbling skills in soccer. But it's not very particularly helpful to know that this is one of the few scientific laws in psychology. It's called the power law of learning. It's not very helpful just to know that this is a fact, particularly if you want to make a robot learn or you want to improve your own learning. So on this project, we try to look deeper at what happens in between the actions you take while you're practicing a skill and how good you actually get. And these are plots of traces in blue of someone's movements as they successfully try to find a hidden target. The hidden target is shown in red. So if you just look at the top row, you can see someone on attempt 1, they explore all over the grid, they're moving a joystick with their hand, there's a hidden target, when they hit that we ping them with a reward, and then they reset and they have another go. That's shown as you move from left to right. The top row is humans, the bottom row is rats. And they show the same fundamental feature, that there's a period of exploration, the generation of experiences, and those experiences are refined until, after several goes, people are going straight from where they start to the target, a more or less straight line, a bit straighter for the humans. So this is putting a microscope on learning. But I did this research and I realised that I'd fallen prey to a bias that's in almost all the psychology literature on learning. 100 years of experimental psychology on learning suffers from a fundamental constraint about how we can do experiments on skill. Now, what you can do, if you think about the learning curve, and what I did was I got people in to my lab and I had an hour of their time, and I looked at the very beginning, this rapid acquisition bit of the learning curve. They learned a relatively meaningless task, an arbitrary task, for an hour. If I was really, really charming, or I paid them, maybe I could persuade them to come back next week, and then I would have 2 hours of their time. I would still be at the beginning of the learning curve. You know that you have thousands of hours of walking, talking, etc., that allow you to be immensely skilled at those things. And we want to understand not just the beginnings of skill, but, mastery of skill. An opposite strategy is to do this. Go right to the end. Find the people who've mastered something, the chess grandmasters, the concert pianists. Get them into the lab. You can maybe have an hour of their time, And you can see someone who's really good at a skill, but you can't tell what did they do to get like that. You can ask them, and they might have their own opinions, but I'm a psychologist, so I don't take anyone's word from it. What I really want to do is trace from the beginning to the end, to join up all the actions someone takes during practicing so that I can find out what they did at the beginning that meant that they were so good at the end. Of course, you can go and get people at different levels of skill, but you've still not joined up that history. You haven't got the individual differences. So you can find people who've not played the piano before, get them after a year, get them after 2 years, get them after 10 years. You see that people keep on learning. There's a famous study by Crossman. He went to the cigar rolling factory. People who've been rolling cigars for 20 years were rolling them faster than people who've been rolling them for 10 years. So even after you've been doing the skill for 10 years, you could still improve. But you don't know what it is in the actions you take that makes you learn. It could just be more practice, but I want to understand the algorithm, I want to understand what it is about practice that helps you learn. So I had an idea. This is how good you can get at a computer game. This is Tetris. The blocks drop from the ceiling, you make lines. There's the guy's hands, here's the game world. He's quick, isn't he? He's world champion at Tetris. Don't know what he's doing, but he's doing it quick. He's beaten the arcade game. When you win, the blocks continue to appear, but they're invisible. The credits roll, he's still playing. He can't see what he's done, but he can still master the game. Pretty good. No, pretty good. So he's not a concert pianist. He's not a Premier League football player. But I can't get those guys and record every action they take on the way to becoming that level of skill. Video games, because they're done through a computer, you can unobtrusively record every action that's taken. So that's the dream. The natural history of skill learning, every action you take from a beginner to mastery. People spend thousands of hours of games. You can be a professional game player. People become truly excellent in skill terms here. So it's interesting to me as a psychologist. So here's the story of how I did some research on that. I realized I wanted to get data from game players, and I knew some game players, but I needed the game designers. I needed to have people have access to the raw data. That's what I dream about as a scientist. I go to sleep, I dream about data and graphs. That's the holy grail. How did I get hold of that? Well, I was lucky. I met a guy called Toby Barnes at breakfast with some friends, and he said, you should go to the Silicon Roundabout. Silicon Roundabout? Well, California, there's the Silicon Valley where the tech firms will work. And did you know that in the UK, there's an equivalent area of tech firms, but it's on the Old Street Roundabout in East London. So the Silicon Roundabout. Go there, he said. Speak to my friends preloaded. They make games. They will give you the data. So I travelled on my quest on the train to the Silicon Roundabout, Old Street Roundabout in East London. And Preloaded said, well, yes, actually, we are making a game, and it's funded by the Wellcome Trust. And because they are scientific funder, they would be probably very happy if we share our data with you. And I said, bingo. People are going to play the game. I'm going to get the data. I'm going to see how good people get at this game. Here's the game. It's called Axon. Entirely coincidentally, it's a game about navigating the growth of a brain cell. That's just coincidence that I'm in the psychology department and the game is about the growth of brain cells. Your score is how far you get in the bottom, micrometers. You're the white dot. There's a sphere around you where you can jump, and you jump by clicking, and the sphere shrinks with time. So if you don't make a decision, then your game's over and you die. And you have to jump to other dots further up the screen, and there are competing dots there in red. You can play it online. There's the link if I link that. No, I don't dare press that, see what happens next. A trivial game, a stupid game, the sort of game you play on your phone or in your lunch hour, but it doesn't matter. For a psychologist, it contains the fundamentals of skill, perception, decision making, and then action. So this is, for you, trivial, sort of thing you do in a few spare minutes. but really hard. Or your brain is doing all the hard work for you, and that's the stuff I want to understand. How does your brain synchronize the perception, the decision making, the action, so you can display skill? People played this game. I got the data. I did what any naive psychologist would do when the new data arrived from the game company. I tried to open it on my computer in Excel. And I said I was a naive psychologist. And my computer crashed because there was so much data that there wasn't enough working memory on my computer to have all the data open at once. And that's my definition of big data. You hear a lot of people talk about big data now. I don't really know what the term means. For me, it just means it crashes my computer when I try and open it. So I was a bit stuck. My normal technique is useless here. So spoke to my friend Mike. He was working at the New York Times R&D lab at that time. I spoke to him via Skype. That's why he appears heavily pixelated on this slide. Mike said, Excel, that's not going to work. You can't do that. And I was trying to write some analysis code, and I'd spent like a week writing this analysis code, and it took 2 days to run. And I swear, on the Skype call, Mike wrote in about 2 minutes some analysis code that did what my code did, but better in 40 seconds, using a programming language called Python, which I would love to advocate to you. So I said, okay, I've got to ditch Excel, I've got to learn Python, new analysis technique, the game has changed, I'm in a new space, I'm going to analyze this data in a new way. And so I spent some happy times drawing graphs, which I will now share with you. Here, this is a graph of the locations of 4 million examples of this game played around the world. Now you'll notice that if you plot the latitude and longitude of where the game is played, it looks like most population maps you have seen. It's actually an internet connectivity map, really. It's a map of the world where people played the game. You'll be able to recognize some of this continents. Probably looks familiar. Someone asked me once in talk, what's that little island above Japan? What's that little island above Japan? Is there an island above Japan? That is South Korea. Very heavily internet connected. Lots of people play my game in South Korea. It's not an island, because geographically it's next to North Korea, where they don't play my game. Here's England. Big data. Lots of people play the game. Lots of people play the game and then only play once. And we never see them again. In fact, the game designers told me that of the people that click on the link, the game takes 3 seconds to load. You click it, and it says loading, 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 and then you start playing. Of people who click on the link, half never wait for the link to load, which tells you something about attention spans on the internet. But enough people survive to play my game for minutes, hours. Some people play it hundreds of times. So I can look at skill acquisition in the game. This looks like the learning curve that I drew from an equation. This is the data. The error bars on this data are so small that you cannot see them at this resolution, because all the noise washes out when you have nearly 1 million people playing your game. Attempts 1 to 10, average score. On the y-axis, people get better, and then they slow down in the rate they get better. Let's take this graph out a bit further. Attempts 1 to 100. You can see that the average score gets a bit noisy because we've got dramatically fewer people playing 100 games compared to playing one. But still, we've got regularity. We've got learning is occurring. People are changing in their performance, so learning is happening. In my Petri dish, I can now start to analyze the science of learning. What do we know about learning from 100 years of experimental psychology? Well, we know the amount you practice is important. In fact, there's a guy, here he is, Anders Ericsson. He has studied a thing he calls deliberate practice, and from him comes the phrase called the 10,000 hours rule, you might have heard of. His claim is that, it's quite a radical claim, everyone who's achieved world-class mastery in a skill has done thousands, if not tens of thousands of hours of practice. And, this is the radical part, and just doing the thousands of hours of deliberate practice will make you world-class in a skill. It's not about innate talent, it's just about practice. You've got to put in the hours, and if you do put in the hours, you can achieve that level of skill. Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers is the one who popularised the idea of the 10,000 hours rule and some of its misinterpretations. Could we test that? Could we test it with my data? How would we test it? Well, if you think about it, if the only factor that affected skill acquisition was practice, you'd have one graph. You'd have the learning curve here. We'd define some level as expert, and the people who were really expert would not be any different at the beginning. They'd be on this blue line, but they'd just keep going for longer. If practice amount was the only thing that mattered, what would people's initial ability look like? Well, they would have different curves. They'd have, you on the blue line, getting better quickly, achieving some level of skill. Me on the green line, starting off a bit low down, going a bit slower than you, not as good. So how are we going to test this? We get my game data, high score table, familiar to anyone who's played a computer game. We rank people by their all-time best score. And then we go back in time and we look at their first go and we work out the average for people in the top 20%, how good they are on their first go. And we do that for the people who are in the 20 to 40th percentile and the bottom 20%, so we have 5 lines. And I'm going to show you the graph now. Are they on top of each other, those 5 lines? So the people who go on to get the first scores just practiced more, or do they separate out? Well, the slightly depressing news is they separate out really cleanly. So the people who go on to get the high scores are scoring, if you see here, they're scoring more on their first go and they're learning quicker. So there's something else going on other than just the amount you practice. Spacing is important. So we know from experimental psychology, I tell my students this, that if you've got 4 hours to practice something, whether it's a physical skill or like revise for an exam, you can do it the way everyone does it. You can wait till 11 o'clock the day before the exam, and you can do 4 hours in a row till 3 a.m. And that is not as effective. Those guys do that. They're laughing in recognition. That's not as effective as taking your 4 hours and spreading them out and practicing and revising for an hour on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And if you do that, you will learn more. If you just want to learn the same amount, you can actually reduce the amount you study. So, you might not want to get really good at your exam. You might just want to spend more time doing other things. So you could do 3 hours, an hour on Monday, an hour on Wednesday, and an hour on Friday. No one does that because it requires organisation, but it's undoubtedly the most effective way to practice. Say the lab studies. Can I see that in my data? This is 2 learning curves. People who played their first few goes, first 5 goes altogether, and then half of them kept on playing, and half of them took a break. So it's a natural experiment. I just find people in the data who took a rest of a couple of hours in between doing their first, but their goes 1 to 5 and their subsequent goes. And you can see the learning curves separate. The people who take the break go on to achieve higher levels of performance. Recently, redid this with the same data, but a larger data set, and I looked in the data for people who played in the morning and then 8 hours later in the evening, or people who played in the evening and then played in the morning, and compared them. So those are the blue and the red dots. The reason I wanted to compare them was because there's other results that show that if you sleep in between practicing a skill and being tested on it, you consolidate. So the memory strengthens, you can actually get gains in skill from sleeping. Say these lab experiments. Can I see that in my data? So taking people who practice in the morning and the evening, or the evening and the morning, they have the same chance to forget, the same chronological time, hours time, but we assume one group has gone to sleep and the other hasn't. The fact that the red and the blue icons overlap shows there is no benefit of sleep consolidation in this game data. We agreed I was going to finish at 10 past, but 20 minutes is actually now.
It is now.
So shall I stop now? I think that would be best, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. We're going to skip a couple of slides. And I'm going to give you the conclusion slide. It's the best slide. Okay. So just bear with me. Other graphs, wonderful graphs, beautiful graphs. So I'm tremendously excited about this. Games afford us insight into what I call the natural history of learning. We can join up the actions with their consequences, how you practice with the skill you acquire. It's a large data set, so we remove all sorts of uncertainty that lab experiments have because we have very, very large amounts of data. We can wash out a lot of the noise. It's also really important that this data is from people playing games. They're not in the lab because I'm paying them or because they feel like they owe me a favour. They're playing a game because they want to. They're intrinsically motivated. So that's an incredibly rich, games are an incredibly rich source of data about learning, and I feel really privileged to be in a position where now we can start to ask questions about other things that you might do to improve your learning. Does it matter how difficult the practices you have for how good the skills you get become? Does it matter how you explore, how you follow your curiosity, or do you need to drill particular skills? And what's the balance between them? We're just at the beginning. There's a large amount of data. It's a unique resource for looking at the acquisition of skill. So watch this space, because these are exciting times for the science of learning. And I've been Tom Stafford. Thank you very much.